Yes, I was lucky or not. Um, Having a father that was also very into politics, he was very active in movements and in parties. And since early age, I developed this appetite for this scene, and I started to be part of it when I was 16. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it was more or less after the summer in Portugal, and yeah, since then I'm still here. I'm 33 years old, so been a while. Been a while.
So what got you? What was like the spark that got you interested in right wing politics? Like, I guess you're 16, so you haven't really developed any kind of worldview by that point, but it was because your dad was patriotic, so you grew up with those politics.
Yes, yes, I would say that I was very, the normal, basic nationalist kid back in the days. Not too edgy, not too radical. I started very, very vanilla. I would say, not like kids nowadays. Like nowadays, kids are not, even grown up people. They have all this information, this radical perspective, and all these slop information,
Yeah.
AI flops and so on, and they become really radical. In a couple just minutes or days, they watch a few videos, um, a few clips, and that's it. Actually, no, I was very, just not radical. Indeed, I was just this normal nationalist kid. Um, I started to have like these more edgy views and this conspiracy stuff going on, 1 year after, more or less.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll be honest, if I wasn't into that, into at least like one year time frame of my life that I was into these conspiracies and so on. But yeah, I understood that was, also was like propaganda from the other side, um, and it was with a lot of contradictions. And from there, I started to have another views about I started to become more Europeistic. Um, and yeah, it's weird because I even nowadays I feel a bit outsider because everyone's so radical, everyone is so into the conspiracies and everything's a Kabbalah. And I feel like, oh, like, but these have an explanation, like you can explain this very well in real life, and you give like rational and good arguments, but it's always the same thing, and actually it's very tiring nowadays. um yeah, so yeah, I would say this is more or less like my
Yeah. Did you
development.
see? Did you see the latest kind of schizos did a shooting in San Diego? They did a copycat Brenton Tarrant type of shooting at a mosque.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not very into the details. I watched the video where they suicide.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, but yeah, it's just
That's where
I
that
totally
shit
feel for
goes,
those.
man. That's where that Wignat shit goes. It's just
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
it's nihilistic violence basically, right? But what does it truly accomplish at the end of the day? Like you can go do that and they'll be replaced by 1,000 other immigrants tomorrow. Like the solution has to be a political one, not some random fucking spurred violence that just makes us look crazy. This makes us look like hooligans, criminals, and it doesn't work.
Yes, indeed, I agree with 100% with you. Because the movement used to be very small in Portugal, still not so relevant, but we have a very popular right wing populist party in Portugal. But the movement itself was always very small, and when you go to events, gatherings, and so on, these people, time to time will appear,
You
and
got schizos too?
you know, you know, they're gonna like appear here and there. So I met a few in my like during my life, and yeah, I really don't understand like because our movement have like very serious people, like they are serious, they are passionate about it, and I think they have the good ways to to move and go to keep going. But yeah, these people just you have like you have this saying, like when you have like this boiling water and you put the lobsters, and actually one lobster is like is almost like reaching, like is almost like going out. It's always like this lobster pushing down the other one,
Mm.
and then they just die. Yeah, I feel like it. Like some people are serious and they create like serious groups, and then there's always these people with really bad optics and a really bad message, and it's so tiring because we keep saying like, oh, don't behave like this, it's so stupid, these ideas are like ludicrous and so on, and they keep calling you, you're a traitor, you are this, you are that, you're not like the real deal. And I remember like 1 month ago when the United States found out like this Antifa organization that was actually giving money to these, like these fetish right wing groups.
Yeah, the SPLC.
Yeah, so in the end of the day, we are always right, and yeah, it's so tiring. And like this new generation, have not don't have the same information as us. Don't have not like the same reality, and we have like more experience, and we can more or less understand like what's going to happen, with certain person or certain movements or certain ideas,
Mm.
and we always like give good advices, you know, personally through comments, through a message, and they were always like, are so like, I'm so just better than you. Yeah, it is what it is. But the same goes nowadays with Ukraine. So much like this sloppy information going on there.
Mm. So as far as Portugal goes, like you say you're a nationalist. So what does that look like? Does that mean Portugal should be 100% ethnically Portuguese, or are you okay with other Europeans going there in some degree? Maybe not like millions, but some immigration from Europe, or are you okay with immigration from outside of Europe so long as control? What's your plan?
Yeah, I don't I don't use the term nationalist. I just say it because it's just easier for people to understand. I see myself, identitarian, but being identitarian is not quite ideology. It's more like um,
Same milieu, though, right?
sorry.
It's within the same milieu as identitarian, nationalist, right?
Yeah. I feel myself like like identitarian, Europeist. I always like more the term patriotic than actually nationalist, because it's because philosophical, ideological things going on. Nation. I I I consider this to idea of nation that comes from the French Revolution, and I would say that I'm not liberal in this sense, not economically, but the liberal perspective of the worldview ideology of that comes from the
I
the
I
liberal
I
revolution from
I asked
France.
this question to Afonso. So, look, what is Portuguese, right? Because the thing
Mhm.
when it gets down to ethnicity, it gets a little bit blurry, right? So, like, I'm half Spanish, half Czech. I'm not 100% Iberian. Born in Canada but moved back to Spain. So, like, it gets a little tricky when it comes to people that are like mixed race. Let's say somebody's half Portuguese and half, Japanese or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, but they are born and raised in Portugal and they see themselves as Portuguese. Like, do you have any kind of, because at the end of the day, ethnicity is going to be some arbitrary line in the sand, right? It's going to be a percentage. So how do you view it? Are you just like a pan European, like any if they're European, it's good, or If there's is there a cutoff line for what you would
Yeah,
accept?
I enjoy this term pan-European. Yeah, Portugal is basically a synthesis of European people. You know, like the natives uh, are Indo-European, and from there we got the invasions from the Roman Empire. We were under their occupation, and then we came the Goths and the Visigoths,
Yeah.
the German tribes, and then we got almost conquered by the Muslim by the Muslim Caliphate. But this Muslim Caliphate, it was mostly um, a military occupation, so it wasn't so expressive in terms of population living in Iberia, and mostly were Berbers, so North African people that were they are not like from a Semitic background, you know, they're more similar to Europeans than anything else. And also it was a German kingdom in north of Africa, and also they came to Portugal, and actually a very small minority of Semitic Muslims were living in Portugal. And then after this was the Reconquista, so we conquer territory from the Muslims, and then many Europeans came to Portugal, French, Hungarian, Italian, mostly to fight the Muslims, and also our kingdom is very related with the European nobility. So I would say that the core of the Portuguese people still like the native ones. You can see that we have a distinct ethnic group. Even you can see this difference between some people from Spain. So I would say that we are biological European. I would say that like um, yeah, I have no issue.
Can you tell the
I have
difference with
no issue.
Spain though? I mean, the Spaniards and Portuguese are pretty close,
Yes, yes, yes.
pretty damn
100%.
close.
We are very, very close. But yeah, I can spot a Spanish guy. I know that it looks a bit, a bit mystical what I'm saying, almost, like not
Yeah,
not scientific.
I can't spot. I mean, because you got different types. Like you look in Spain, you got Piqué, who looks like he could pass for French, he could pass for
Mm-hmm,
German, and then
mm-hmm,
you have
mm-hmm.
like Penelope Cruz, who's got a bit of a darker phenotype. So it's like all European countries have these different facial types and phenotypes. You don't see 100% one phenotype in each country. You could find Northern Europeans that have dark hair, dark eyes, even olive
Yes, yes.
skin. And they're not like these schizos try to pretend like those people are somehow like meds that went up there. No, they're actually just indigenous Northern European. They just have that
Mm-hmm.
phenotype. Brown hair and eyes exist in every European group. So yeah, I mean, and then there's like the blending of like North American whites are very blended, right? They're not pure really anything at this point. There's Italians, Germans, English, Scottish, all mixed together. So I don't know if you can base the nation exclusively based on an ethnicity. I would be more like a pan-European, be like, your European immigrants are pretty good. They're not, they assimilate, so we should let some of them in.
Yes,
But
yes, I agree with you. I agree with your view. Some people from the conservative spectrum of Portugal don't see it in this way. They are very nostalgic about the empire, and they say,
you tell me,
a black guy from Angola, or a guy from Brazil, or a guy from Timor, or from Goa in India. They are, they're still Portuguese, or they should be Portuguese. And people like with my views, they say no, they are not. We actually, I don't mind to see like a mix Portuguese with a mix
You, you,
Czech guy,
you
you
telling me
know.
that these guys would reject a bunch of hot Swedish women coming into Portugal? It's crazy.
Yeah, they. It's a huge contradiction because
Ukrainian
first of
women,
all,
Polish
especially,
women. I mean, come on.
yeah, it's just it's pure contradiction, and
Like what? I for me, if she's, I don't really care what her ethnicity, as long as she's like, she's in the European sphere.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna be so strict about, oh, she has to be from Iberia, man. Like, no,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
plenty of the women here are just unmarriageable. They're just feminazis and stuff. So if I can find a Polish woman that's more feminine,
In Spain, you say,
yeah. So if I can find a
okay.
Polish woman that's more feminine, that's good
I
looking and
know
so
it
on.
is. I lived in Spain, and very often people forget, in the right wing scene, they really, think about Sweden, Germany, the States, like to be like where like the really hardcore feminists, feminazis and so on. But Spain, really have a big problem with that.
Yeah.
Really, really is.
So you would you accept any non-white immigration into Portugal as far as your immigration policy goes?
We are just so full of immigration. This is suicidal. It makes no sense. Even even before having this immigration phenomenon, you know, we also I won't agree with that. I really think that it really destroys our our core society, and I don't see no benefits because we are so different. Can be culturally, on the way like we behave and so on. And this creates always like this very antagonic and pressure on society. So it's not good.
So would you
So
rather have like a Polish person come in or someone who speaks Portuguese from Brazil, for example?
yes, yes. For example, like I remember in the 90s, we had like some Czech engineers that came here after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they went to work in the construction sites and so on. Yeah, and they assimilate very well. I mean, like just a couple of years, they can learn very well the language. They will enjoy our culture and so on. They will actually adapt to our culture, to the Portuguese culture and our way of living. And I see always this pattern with from people from the South global, from Brazil, Africa, and so on.
Yeah.
They will just live in their bubble, in their ethnic ghettos, and like you have so many Africans that came from the 90s, and they're still not like culturally assimilated because the differences are so deep that actually they have a problem with that. And even their children and grandchildren have this problem too. And I don't see this, for example, with the Ukrainian diaspora that came here 20-25 years ago. Like the young Ukrainians, they came, or even the daughters and sons of them, and now they are totally assimilated to our culture. The point that you can see because they have like this Slavic face and so on, but how they speak, what they eat, what they listen, so it's very insane.
But like a Brazilian that speaks Portuguese is
Mm.
pretty close. I mean, they have some Portuguese descent, don't they?
Yeah, if we talk from
I mean, some of them are white, like
center from south.
southern Brazil
Mhm.
are white mostly.
Yeah, the southern. I think I would say people from Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, they have more like Portuguese backgrounds. The south is very mixed with Germans,
Yeah.
Italians, Japanese, Syrian, and mm, the north is more indigenous, people from Africa, and Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo is like German. Uh, you can see really a Portuguese, um, ethnical heritage there. But yeah, it's very interesting because we are separated for just a few centuries, and I really see this divorce between Portuguese and Brazilians in many ways.
So what does remigration mean? Because that word gets thrown about. I mean, I haven't read Martin Selmer's book, so I don't know exactly what he proposes. But you've read that book. Does he propose like what is the proposal that he's going to like? Let's say there's millions of citizens of Europe that are not European descent or they're mixed race. Is he proposing deporting like 100% of everybody that's not white, or like what's his proposal?
Yeah, I read this book. Actually, I even published this book in my publishing house. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting concept. I'm very into it. I'm very enthusiastic about it because nowadays politicians are talking about and the talking points about remigration. Even the European Union doing like some concepts from this book. Um,
But does he advocate
Trump,
for like a
yeah,
hundred
I will
percent
go
white
further with
Europe,
that.
or is it what is it?
Yeah, I'll get there in a very short time. But yeah, and Trump's talking about it, so this term is getting traction on the political sphere, and I think it's very positive. Um, yeah, the book is very technical, and is very based on legal, like mm, thing like this. Martin is from Austria, and I think he got a team of like people that know what he could say and not, and it is very specific. He just talks in a very abstract way that we have to first assimilate people. If the ones that are not assimilated, even they are from first or second or third generation, they should get re-immigrate. They should be re-immigrate to to their original country. So yeah, it's a very it's blurry and it's very abstract about it's not specific. He gives like good examples. For example, he talks about the Serbs and everyone that came from the Balkan War that went to Austria, and they actually were very they assimilate very well to the society and explain why they came from the same uh, European, ethnical group, same religion, same civilization, and he gives example, from Turkish and so on. They actually, also second, third generation, they didn't assimilate, and maybe it's a good idea to remigrate them. So, and he give like good, like money, for example, and he do this calculation how much it should be and how much will be reasonable, and actually doesn't, is not so bad for in terms of taxes and so on. So you have everything going on there. Like it's a very like solid book, very like based on the legal framework of Austria. Like if you have like okay, I can actually deport or I can do re-immigration based on this legal framework that I have in Austria. So it's based on this. Of course, it doesn't say if you're black, if you're white, but you give very good examples. And yeah, I think it's a book that is very worth reading.
So it's only talking about Austria. He's not like referring to all other countries.
Yeah, he gives a definition of remigration, the concepts, and then the book is based on Austria. Yeah, on Austria, basically.
So would he does he want to remigrate like because there are examples of other Europeans who haven't necessarily assimilated, right? So like in Spain, we got little enclaves of British people. Like you got this it's called Benidorm, and if you go to Benidorm, I mean it looks like England, right? Like you got all these English shops, English restaurants. They speak English. They don't really speak Spanish. You have like Germans living in Mallorca who just speak German. They don't speak Spanish. So like, would he apply the same thing to other Europeans as well, or like what's his definition of assimilation? Like speaking the native language. What else?
Yeah, it doesn't go into these details. But yeah, the language will be, but I mean, you're talking about very specific, for example, of course, we also have the same thing going on in Portugal,
Mm,
like Dutch people living, their
right.
fantasy life in their vans and so on, and
Right.
like their communities.
Retired people.
Yes, yes, they're living the good boomer life. I wish, but yeah. So that's so specific, like so niche.
It
You
needs.
don't have.
You don't think it needs to be specific though? Because like if we just talk in terms of these vague terms like remigration, it's people are like, well, what does that mean? Like, you need to get into some details eventually.
Yeah, like for example, for my taste, I don't mind see these Dutch people living their van life. I have like I think it's very okay with doesn't really affects my life.
Right.
Um, I don't see any issue with these European enclaves, and you know why, because they are peaceful, you know, they own their own business, like and it's
Well,
very like it will in the end it's very niche. Like for example, now we have this phenomenon that we are full of Ukrainians,
yeah.
and I see a very big difference between the first generation, 25 years ago, the diaspora, and the so-called refugees. And because there are so many nowadays, and with you have phones and AI, so you have so many people can live in your own bubble, so you don't have to adapt to your surrounding because you can live in your own bubble. And I see these Ukrainians are not learning our language, and actually they don't care about our culture. Actually, this is I it's very upset to me. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like their cosmopolitan way of life, and it's annoying. Although I'm 100% pro Ukraine, but these
Mm.
really annoys me, and I see no effort from them. After 4 3 years, they are here. And this is actually very 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 big issue for me because there are so many, and sometimes I don't want to feel a stranger in my own neighborhoods or streets. So if
Yeah.
I think it should be something that should demand some kind of simulation. If
Mm.
they are not simulating, well, they have a beautiful country called Ukraine, and they should return there.
Cool. Cool. All right. So let's jump into your book here. So I brought it up. It's called Ukraine and Identity and Perspective. So this is partly kind of like a memoir, would you say? It's got details about your trip to Ukraine plus your geopolitical analysis. Is it sort of like a combination of those two styles?
Yeah, I got this idea to incorporate in my book just small passage of my visits and like when I was living in Ukraine. So in between chapters, you can see it's like some pages dedicated to like some experience, some stories that I have in Ukraine before and after the full scale invasion or during the full scale invasion. But mostly the book is I really had like this. I didn't want to write this book. I just wrote this book because nobody was writing this book. And actually, after releasing the book, many people came to me and said, "Oh, I wish this was the book that I wrote." Like a few people told me this already, and I was like, "Seriously, why didn't you?"
Mm.
um, so yeah, I really think this is very necessary to have like these, nationalists, right? Like right dissidents and identitarian perspective because I really think that Ukraine was very negligent about this political spectrum and really focused on the center and NPCs, boomers, progressive, liberal people. and they were very good to create this Zelensky image and the victimhood of Ukraine. And but they really were neglected by this radical political spectrum, the left on the right. The left, I really don't care, but the right, I thought, okay, I'm quite experienced. I know what's the rhetorics, the arguments against Ukraine. So basically, it's a book uh, with our perspective, but a pro-Ukraine perspective. And I try to debunk Russia propaganda and myths about Ukraine and even Russia itself.
Yeah, do you think just Zelensky was pretty much just pandering to whoever was in the White House? So when Biden was in the White House, he started to make these kind of progressive left wing gestures, and he tried to table some LGBT legislation. He had like a transsexual spokesperson, English language spokesperson. Like it seemed like he was just pandering to the libs when they were in power, but then once Trump got in power, he kind of dropped that. Now he's just, you know, just asking for weapons. He's not really playing the culture war game anymore.
Yeah, this is actually a good analysis. I didn't think about it. Yeah, I think Zelensky is not omnipresent, so he really cannot decide every single detail about Ukraine. You know, so many things that happen in Ukraine is out of the reach of Zelensky. Actually, I'm talking about eternally, of course. Um, yeah, I think it makes sense. In a country that try to pandering this, or especially European Union. Um, yeah, but I see so many anticorps um, towards these progressive liberal policies. They actually very. They,
He's a
it's not the subjects. It's like and also Ukraine is more or less a failed state. So when they do something, I don't see it as a serious thing. When Spain does, for example, a law about abortion, about immigration and so on. Is I know that's ideological. I know there's a decision, is planned and so on, and it's part of their worldview. When Ukraine does something similar to, well, doesn't even do something similar, but when there's policies, I really don't think they think like on the future or long term or medium term. It's just you know
Yeah, he's a centrist, so Zelensky's like
Mhm.
malleable. He could take up any position at any time, depending on what he thinks is expedient. So like he got interviewed once by Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro asked him a few questions about culture issues, and Zelensky gave these like cut out boring like AI responses. He didn't even answer the questions basically. So he more or less has zero positions on any culture issues. He's just like this cut out wartime leader who just acts strong, but he doesn't have like he's just an actor. He doesn't have any political experience or ideology. He just simply wanted to be president of Ukraine, and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
he's developed patriotism because of the war. But as we know, before the war started, he was more or less making overtures to the Russian side. He wanted to make a peace deal with the rebels. He was not like a hardcore gung ho Ukrainian nationalist. He was more or less from the east of Ukraine, speaks Russian as a first language. So it seems like he's just adopted positions to benefit himself.
yeah. I agree with you. And actually, this is very interesting because in the last 2 weeks, these like fake news are coming up on internet saying like like even like right wing influencers saying, oh, you know like this puppet Zelensky, Jewish puppet Zelensky, they would just want to have war and have like ethical cleansing. They want to try the Ukrainian people, and now they're importing millions of black people. Like
Right.
seriously. And it's like, I go to the comment section, and I only see this, and it's really so tiring because it's not true. It's not a reality. They are not importing mass immigration, and actually this was like out of context. They are now talking about bringing immigrants, but
Right.
society is really pushing this hard, and only it's very interesting that's actually like a few liberals in Ukraine that wants this, and European and Americans that are in Ukraine, like NGOs or journalists and so on. They are doing like pushing this a little bit, and they took this really out of context. So are you aware who is Bodanov?
No.
He was the head of the Ukrainian Secret Service.
Mm.
Is the guy that plans attacks on Crimea or Donetsk, whatever. And now he's like head chief of the president cabinet of. So it's like one of the most popular guys in Ukraine, and it's very powerful. And he had like this meeting, like this summit with businessmen, entrepreneurs, and he got really pushed hard by them because they were asking for immigration to open the borders because they don't have like enough workers,
Mm.
and they had this idea to bring the from Sri Lanka or from Bangladesh. And actually Bodanov said like, oh, this is not such a good idea and so on, actually because it's very close to the nationalist groups in Ukraine.
Mm.
And so I think the guy is very nationalist, and he actually was giving like not such good arguments, but in the end it's like, yeah, we are like talking with some African countries to do like some kind of partnership and like have workers, um, and from this they took off the context and saying that the Ukraine is importing millions of immigrants, is a Jewish conspiracy and so on. But actually, if you watch the is online, and actually it's the businessmen, the entrepreneurs that are pushing this, not like some kind of conspiracy. It's so
Mm.
transparent, it's so there, and
Yeah,
it's so annoying.
that's no different than any other Western country that has the same
Mhm.
pressures. They say talk about labor shortages. I mean, in Ukraine, there's probably a very real labor shortage because so many men are dying on the front line. So many
I think it's
civilians.
more
So
men
many.
like living than dying, but yeah.
Yeah, so both leaving, dying. So they probably definitely have some kind of massive labor shortage, but that's the same situation in all of Europe. We have boomer populations that are aging. We have low birth rates, and so the governments are all pushing for more immigrants to pay the pensions and pay the social security because we don't have any new people being born to enter the workforce. And so that's like the same situation in every country. So like why would that I mean Putin does the same shit, he brings Central Asians into Russia to work and he
Yeah.
imports he imports them into eastern Ukraine and like Mariupol. He's dumping all kinds of foreigners in there and demographically changing the thing. So, yeah, that's just a bad faith argument from the ziggers. Is just like only look at some liberal stuff going on in Ukraine, ignore the liberal stuff Russia does, ignore the ethnic replacement Russia does in the east, pushing Ukrainians out, bringing Central Asians and Chechens and so on in, or other Russian speakers. Ignore all that, and then just highlight the libtards in Ukraine and what they do, and say, "Oh, that's why." Okay, so don't you want them? Do you actually want Ukraine to improve, or like you just like highlight some issues in Ukraine? Therefore, dismiss their entire sovereignty. They shouldn't exist now. Like it doesn't really make
No,
sense.
really, yeah, yeah. And I point this in my book with the essay.
Yeah.
Um, that's very good point. So like they are like the last 2 weeks they are really pushing this narrative that immigrants in Ukraine and no immigrants there. Like they're starting to have like some, but it's not, and Russia, immigration since the 90s,
Yeah.
and like a huge, like the nationalist white groups in Ukraine, they have like in Russia, sorry, they have lots of fights with these people and they get stabbed. It's really nasty. They have these reports that white Russian nationalists killed like 2,000 immigrants, you know, in the 90s, in early 2000s, which is a huge number. So they really have this issue. I did a seminary with white Russian back in 2018. So a very famous Russian group. I organized this event and it is a seminar, and they talked about this openly. And they said they cannot talk about this because they have a huge repression in Russia. Of course, in Russia you can be traditional, conservative, but you cannot talk about white Russians because you're going to go to jail or worse. And also a huge contradiction about this is also the fact, you know, the immigration issue and the issues in Ukraine also. But they always like they keep saying like Zelensky is a dictator, um, Ukraine is a totalitarian regime having money from European Union and so on.
Can you see
And
this
they,
picture here?
yeah, of course. And they always forget that Putin, you know, kills journalists, political opposition on the right and the left. So it's like insane. They you know, they glamorize Russia. They forget about, you know, because they have like this moral framework, you know, moral compass, a liberal moral compass about good and bad, about, you know, because Ukraine does this because it's bad, Ukraine does this totalitarian thing because, you know, I'm. It looks like they are in this progressive democratic moral framework, but then there is a huge contradiction. Makes no sense. It's very confusing. Yeah,
No, well, it's just deliberate disinformation. They're just omitting all kinds of information from the picture to paint an exclusively negative picture about Ukraine, ignoring all the same issues going on with Russia, ignoring the enormous crimes they're committing in eastern Ukraine. They're really
and
actually committing
Belarus
a
as well, you know.
cultural ethnic cleansing to a degree. They're pushing Ukrainians out, or they're forcing them to take Russian citizenship and drop the Ukrainian, forcing them to speak Russian and not Ukrainian, and importing a bunch of Russian speakers from Russia and Central Asia to cleanse the place out and Russify it. So it's okay to do a cultural genocide, but Ukraine is like uniquely bad because there's some people in Ukraine that support immigrants. like, there's no
Yeah,
logic to this bullshit. But
yeah,
this,
yeah. It makes no sense, and because, you know, because Zelensky is a Jew, Ukraine is not worth, you know, fighting for or
it's
protect or to
Jew.
be under our sphere.
It's Ukraine, Luis. It's Ukraine, right? It's
Yeah,
Ukraine.
yeah, yeah.
So that it's so easy to debunk the Jew stuff, right? Because
So easy, yes.
Zelensky married a Christian woman. His kids are raised Christian, baptized. Like there's there's other Jews in Ukraine who fell out with Zelensky. Like even Kolomoisky was arrested and put under house arrest. So he's clearly
What?
not just working with them all
And
together.
now he was like he was talking openly that he wants to impose sanctions on Israel. But yeah, definitely it was like a Jewish. Mm,
I mean, Poroshenko is not Jewish, and the conflict started with him in power in 2014. And secondly,
well, it did start with him, but he was definitely the guy that started the Ukrainization of society, and he was very open and very pro-West. So this is also a very good argument because for our side, because they say, oh, Zelensky, you know, just want to have war and create chaos and so on. Uh, Slavic brothers, you know, and you know, are people aware who was the opponent of Zelensky? It was a super pro-Ukrainian guy, and if he won,
uh,
I think the war will, you know, probably started even earlier. So this makes no sense. Of course, I really see a connection with actually Zelensky and Jews because Ermark is Jew, Kolmonsky is Jew, and they got all, you know, with problems with justice, and you know probably going to go to jail, and even many they flew to Israel, and you know, but they took advantage of this chaos of this problem, you know, because you know how Jews work, you know, they're more or less like in the tribal way. so they help each other. But definitely it wasn't this conspiracy that to destroy Ukraine or this or that. I think
Well, there's
the
Jews
media.
dying on the front lines. You could go look it up. There are several hundred Ukrainian Jews that have
Yes,
died
yes.
in the war on the front lines. You can find articles of Jewish soldiers on the front lines on both sides. They're conscripted like other people, and there's Jews on both sides. So why would that be the case? Like these people
Mhm.
just they just see a figurehead and they just make all these assumptions. They never look at any of the details. If they truly created the conflict just to get Slavs to kill each other while they reap the rewards, then why are Jews
Yeah,
dying on the front lines? Surely there would be no Jews that would die on the front lines. Secondly, all those billionaires you're talking about, I think like 40% of them were Jewish in Ukraine. There's not that many though. There's like maybe like 20 billionaires or something. And they all lost their fortunes. You can go look this up. There's so many articles showing the Ukrainian billionaires lost all their businesses, were blown up in the east of Ukraine, which is where a lot of them were at. They've lost billions of dollars because of the war. Now, why is
yeah.
that good for
And
them?
if they're like really like how they describe it is, why are they getting in jail and having problems with
Yeah.
um if they were like really like this Kabbalah going on, probably they will be protected by the system. But the system is working against them as well, so it makes no sense.
Putin's
Uh,
not Jewish, and Putin invaded Ukraine, and he invaded Ukraine for Russian reasons, not Jewish reasons, for Russian geopolitical reasons,
100%.
Russian chauvinism, Russian expansionism, nothing to do with Jews.
Yeah,
And he used like, the denazification argument. Like some of the schizos actually play the whole both sides are run by them claim. They're all powerful. They can control both sides of every war. You see,
yeah. They say it's like they say that the Jews control and they are using Nazis.
right? They control the
They're like
Nazis.
they're
Yeah.
like their dog attack to
So
Nazis.
powerful, man. These guys are Superman.
Yeah, this is the thing that I really don't like about the anti-Semitism. They really put them like gods,
Yeah.
or semi-gods, and they really look unstoppable and so tiring. But to understand this conflict, when you have like a broader perspective and deep knowledge about the roots of the problem, about the origins of Ukraine and Russia, you can easily understand where this war comes from. And I explained in this book, I actually explained the origin of Ukraine. I showed that they have their own identity. They are not like this Lenin Frankenstein that was like a Soviet construction. Actually, no, they are an ethnical group or linguistic group, a cultural group. And actually, if we are being very honest, they even expand outside of their current borders, all the way to Russia and Hungary and Belarus. And yeah, Ukraine really have their own identity, and is why they actually were able to stop Russia because nationalism is so strong and they have such a strong sense of identity over there. And also, they don't know the origin of Russia. How Russia actually wasn't Russia; it was Muscovy until the 18th century, and they just did this rebrand thing, after they annexed the Cossack Ataman, and they call themselves Russian Empire. But before that, it was the Muscovite Empire. But this a big problem for them because the Muscovites came from the Mongolian Empire. They were like paying tribute for several hundred years. So they thought, okay, Russia more is more noble. The Rus, the Kievan Rus and stuff. Yeah, but this all art very artificial is not real. Russia doesn't exist for 1,000 years. Russia doesn't exist for 500 years. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Russia, actually, if we are being very, very honest, Russia that exists now exists the same time as Ukraine since 91. Um, so yeah, is a really like very interesting this chapter in my book called Muscovy, and people really should read this because they will understand where it comes from. Actually, all the documents show the maps, the coins, the letters, the journals, all said it was the Muscovy um, Principate or the Moscow Kingdom. So only they're like a real rebrand of their country, and now they're called Russia. But actually, Russia comes from where is Ukraine nowadays. It's very complex and very interesting history to learn about it.
Any other myths you want to break down in the book?
Mm, I really want to touch in one subject. Um, I think it's the most relevant one, and I think it's and people really like to talk about this in a moralistic point of view. Like how Ukrainians are dying, they are brothers in war, and so on, and they are really patriotistic. No, sorry, they are really moralist about this, and but my biggest issue about this is the fact that Ukraine would always try to resist and fight and push back Russia, no matter what, having external help or not. And the biggest, like, I think I did like a debate in the like early weeks of this, and I said like it was one of my first point of views when I said like the biggest problem of Ukraine is that all the Ukrainians that going to move from Ukraine, and it's the thing that really upsets me about Putin is because I see all these new generations. Imagine that you're, a young Ukrainian, less than 10 years old, come from Eastern Europe, and you have to travel and, be a refugee, go to you are like at school now in France or Germany or Ireland or Norway. And you are learning that Russia is your enemy, that Russia represents the traditional values, is conservative, and because Russia is associated with this. I also debunked this in my book in my last chapter, but it's another thing. And you know, imagine this: you really hate Russia because you're like you have to run away from it. Russia is associated with these values, and you are like you're going to be raised in France and Germany, and you're going to be in touch for the first time with progressive and liberal values. And this is the thing that really, really upsets me, because before the full-scale invasion, Ukraine was almost untouched by these progressive, values. Only if you, did like a stream on Netflix or something. But before that, they were living in a very normal society, I would say, common sense with patriotic values. It wasn't feminism wasn't a thing there, and now they got forced to move the country, or by choice of their parents, and now they're like, you know, hundreds of thousands of kids now are like at school at these moments with this propaganda from the lefties. And this the thing that really, really upsets me since the first day of the war, and I keep talking about it. And I never seen this argument or this perspective, and I think it's very relevant one. And I think we have to blame Putin for this.
So, can you see this meme right here on the screen?
Yes.
So let's talk about this language issue. So a lot of the Ziggers push this fake idea that because they speak Russian in parts of Ukraine, that gives Russia some eternal right to conquer any piece of land where people of Russian descent or who speak, even just if they speak Russian, can go and take back. Well,
Thank you, Luís and
then
Brandon.
the
Slavia
entire southern
Ukraini, Viva
United States should
España,
be
Viva
given
Portugal.
back to Mexico, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember being like, it's a very funny meme. By the way, I remember being in Odessa. So I think it's the country, like the part of the Ukraine that speaks more Russian, or more fluent with Russia. I think even more than Archive. Archive, I think young people now are talking Ukrainian. But I was having dinner with this journalist, with this Cosper, this guy that actually is from Eastern Europe, Eastern Ukraine, and he speaks Ukrainian mostly. And we were like, oh, doesn't upsets you that everyone here speaks Russian and are so relaxed about this? And he said to me, like, not really, Luis. Like, I understand it's very complex. It's very complex because I go often to the front lines and I met so many like Ukrainians that speak Russian and they are volunteers and they are fighting for our country. And he gave a very good example of Ireland. So Ireland speaks English. Do they like England? I don't think so. I really think they feel themselves Irish.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this was a very, very great example. But if you read my book, you're going to understand that Ukraine got crucified by 100 years, more than 100 years, 300 years now, by Russia. And not only crucified, but also they import a lot of Russian people to the south and west of Russia, of Ukraine, sorry. And they create these ethnical enclaves or linguistic enclaves in
Yeah. I mean, you could use that argument for like any. I mean, they speak different languages in different European countries, right? You have Catalonia in Spain. They speak Catalan. You probably have some little pieces of other European countries that are on the border with another country, and maybe they speak that language. You got Hungarians living in Ukraine too. I guess Hungary should annex that part of Ukraine. I mean, this we could go all day long with this kind of shit, right? They speak French in Quebec, Canada. They speak English. They speak English in the United States, and it used to be Britain, so I guess Britain has the right to go take back the United States. You're like, this is an absurd argument. I mean, by this logic, there'll be wars going on forever, for all eternity, based off of revanchist claims. So this is a crazy argument, and they could say the same about Finland and the Baltics that also have a Russian minority. Does Putin get to invade Latvia and Lithuania because they have a Russian minority?
Yeah, or or Turkish will be, like will have like a big chunk of 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 Germany at this point in the near
Right.
future. It means that they should claim some areas of Germany and become Turkish. Like
Yeah,
and
50% of Ceuta and Melilla, two Spanish territories in northern Africa, are Moroccan people live there. I guess Morocco can take them back. I mean,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and funny that you see American ziggers making that argument, right? Like, Americans, come on, like half your country
yeah.
was Mexico, buddy. Half your country was Mexico. Half of Texas and California are Hispanic. They're Hispanic, Mexican descent. They speak Spanish. So, by the same logic, Mexico should invade the United States and take back what's rightfully theirs, right? But they'll never apply that argument to their own country because they're fucking idiots.
Yeah, they're really idiots at points. Even like with historical examples, I think this is a problem with nowadays. They really people don't, it's a symptom of our society. So people are lazy to to understand something or to find the evidence. It's why conspiracy theories are so popular nowadays. Also because it's a symptom of our society. Because people want to have like easy information, easy feelings, easy
Mm,
emotions. The same goes with Ukraine. Like okay, I don't want to I don't want to read 5 books about Ukraine
right.
Russo war. I don't want to like watch a documentary. I just want to read catchy words and see some stupid videos. That's it. That's
TikTok,
that's
yeah.
gonna be yeah, yeah, yeah. So we living in liberal society. That's they want to have like instant information. Like I was saying. So the
Well,
same.
it's just the normies got free speech, so they just opened up Pandora's box of politically ignorant dumbasses giving opinions on the internet, and they don't really know what they're talking about. They got no expertise. They don't. do in-depth research. They look at memes. They look at clips on X and TikTok, and then they think they're experts, right? This is a pretty good meme here. We got the neo-Nazi RT viewer. It's funny, neo-Nazism's banned in Russia, but Western neo-Nazis love Putin and shill Putin.
Yeah, I know a guy. I know a guy that run a publishing house here, and he published like, you know, fascist and Nazi books, about Hitler, and I even published like Mein Kampf, and it's like super pro Russia. He even wrote a book about, about these conflicts. And then I think, like, what,
So
seriously, you're publishing books that are forbidden. These ideas are totally forbidden in Russia. Like it or not, I'm not like into Nazis and stuff, but um, yeah,
that's a
I
massive
saw,
contradiction. Hitler called Slavs an inferior race, invaded Russia, and killed 20 million Soviet citizens, but he loves Hitler but loves Russia at the same time. Get that one straight, man.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Putin is
this.
so anti-fascist. He's so openly anti-fascist.
But I mean, his anti-fascism. I mean, it's kind of performative. I mean, he is anti-Nazi because he views Nazis through the Russian lens, right? Which is that
Mhm.
Nazis invaded Russia. Nazis are anti-Slav, which is actually a correct criticism of Nazism, that it is an anti-Slavic,
Agree with you.
Germanic chauvinist imperialist. But Putin's pretty much the same insofar as he's a Russian revanchist chauvinist imperialist. What he's doing in Ukraine is almost identical to what Hitler did in Poland, right? It's, we get to take piece of your territory because there's ethnic people of our ethnicity and culture are living on your territory. That's the exact same thing. And they actually compared the speeches of Hitler's Poland invasion speech and Putin's Ukraine invasion, and it sounded completely identical, right? Same
Yeah, yeah,
arguments.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, going a little bit back, yeah, like, I really enjoyed the skatewoods. You talked about like the slop thing going on now on social media,
Mm-hmm.
and I really advise people to listen to this. Like, it are really good like arguments and context about this slop
Yeah.
information, like info,
Well,
whatever
Putin
going
loves
on.
the slop because you can play into the slop. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, in my book presentation, I mentioned this because this was very, very challenge to write this book because of the propaganda. So you have the official Russian propaganda, anti-Nazi, NATO expansion, all the playbook,
yeah.
and the pro-Russians, especially online, they also play all the narratives, but it's very organic, the Russian propaganda. So we have this own life going on. So at this official Russian propaganda, plus the ones they create, so the anti-Semitic, for example, spectrum. The anti-Semitic is not part of the Russian official propaganda against the Ukrainian invasion or Ukrainian war, but the pro-Russians,
They'll
uh,
use
you
it.
know,
Yeah.
uh, use add these anti-Semitic thing, which is uh, which is makes really really dumb because Russia is smart, doesn't play the anti-Semitic playbook because will be a huge contradiction, but for the anti-Nazi thing going on.
Mm.
So,
But
but
the pro Russian propagandists will use anything. So they'll look at
yeah, yeah,
trends. They'll look at whatever the trend is on X, and they'll just kind of tweak it. They'll tweak it to fit the Russian objectives. So if they have to do anti-Jew, they'll do it. If they have to be, I mean, if they have to be anti-Anglo, I mean, Putin's even made some anti-Anglo-Saxon statements.
yes,
They'll play into the African grievances, the Muslim grievances, the Palestine grievances, the Christians. The pretty much that's their playbook, is to weaponize every argument to their advantage. But I guess
Yeah,
the
yeah,
the other point about NATO. Do you touch on NATO in the book and NATO expansion? I guess you do, right?
yeah. I do. I have like a sub chapter about this. The I debunk this narrative. So people have no notion. They have no mm, context about like the regional parts of this specific part of our continent. They really don't know nothing of what's happening there. So this like NATO expansion really goes well because like I explained in my book presentation in Lisbon. So people have no notion about this area of the globe that's almost mythical. We have some image, about the Soviet whatever gloomy, brutalistic buildings, uh, the Red Star and so on. But it's so easy to create narratives and to influence people because people have no historical context or geopolitical context. So they don't know that the NATO expansion have a reason for that. And actually, it was no agreement between Russia and NATO about expansion. There wasn't no promise, no memorandum, no pact, nothing. You know, nothing was written, nothing was talked about it, and just some misunderstanding of history and context. Um,
Well, they did. They're the anti-NATO people. Like you've seen that guy called Scott Ritter, and then there's another
yes,
one, Scott Horton. So
yeah,
that guy, basically his whole thing is he dug up a bunch of statements from U.S. officials going back to the 70s to the 80s, going back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he found a bunch of like off the books, kind of behind the scenes meetings where American officials kind of made it seem like we're not going to expand NATO. Like that was sort of like floated as a potential talking point, as a potential point of agreement with regards to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, the James Baker statement, they say he was mainly talking about East Germany. He wasn't really talking about Eastern Europe, but I mean, I guess you could extrapolate to say, well, if you're not going to put troops in East Germany, why would you put them in Eastern Europe? But these were statements made by Baker and by a few other people that were not actually officially condoned by the administration. They were kind of personal, off the cuff statements that guy made and a few other people made. They were never put into a real written agreement. So there's no signed agreement between the U.S. or NATO or Russia saying NATO cannot expand. That's not an agreement. So they have to rely on these statements. And then there's a few other statements from U.S. officials, kind of the more cautious, pragmatic ones, who were saying, yeah, if we do expand NATO, this will provoke Russia. But you have to look at this from the perspective of Eastern Europeans. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, their sovereignty was established, and they were desperate to get into NATO to secure their nation states as sovereign states because there's nothing protecting them from Russia doing what it's doing to Ukraine right now, to the Baltics, to Finland, and so on. So they all rushed to get into NATO with the clear track record of Russia occupying their countries. So it's like it's not a surprise why Poland or the Baltics or Finland or Ukraine or Georgia want to get into NATO. It's to protect themselves from Russia. And so like it's a very American perspective to dismiss that concern because it's like you're living in America, you're under no threat of Russian occupation, you have no history of Russia occupying your country, so no shit you don't care about the security issues in Eastern Europe, but they do. And so that's why they joined. And even Putin and Lavrov, as I have on the screen here, says, look, it's their choice. It says, does the right to sovereignty also mean for Georgia and Ukraine that Russia would have nothing against their ascension to EU and NATO? Lavrov says, that's their choice. We respect the right of every state, including our neighbors, to choose its partners to decide for themselves which organization they want to join. And that's what Putin said in 2002 as well. I have that quote. He said the exact same thing. He says, at the end of the day, it's a decision taken by NATO and Ukraine. It's a matter for those two partners. So again, they have to twist the argument. So
Yeah,
if
but Gorbachev, with his talk with Chase Baker, like
yeah,
afterwards, I explained this in my book. It was out of context, and Gorbachev later said that I admitted that Baker's statement was only made in the context of the negotiations on Germany. So they really like take, it's like the same thing with, the Holocaust denying and stuff. They take some contexts and they create a full narrative, and they really don't understand what was happening back in the days. Like, for example, people really don't know that it was like in '93. It was like when it was Eltsin in power in Russia. They did like a coup on the parliament. So they took the parliament in a very violent way. It was gunshots. It was people that died. So understand, if you are like Poland, like you were saying very well, the Baltics, Romania, Georgia, and you see like these very violent, coup on Russia, and, like the faction that's more, anti-democratic wins, and you start to see like journalists going to jail and being killed. The same with politicians, censorship. You still, like, Russia kept its imperial pride and kept all these military, apparatus, and actually develop even more after the fall of the Soviet Union. And if and for example, if you watch like the news and debates in Russia in the 90s and early 2000s, you have like the politicians saying openly that they should retake the old Soviet states or satellites. So this was even a talking point on Russian policy, internal policy, and the neighbors were paying very attention to this. And you see what happened in Moldova with Transnistria, on Georgia, on later on Crimea, and so on. So of course, countries like Poland, Romania, and Baltics, they want to be part of NATO because they see all this escalation of violence from Russia. You
right.
know, so I really have this like this sub chapter called NATO viewed through regional lens. And it's really worth checking out. It's a very small one, but it gives like a very rational one.
Yeah.
So was no treaty like forbidding the admission of new NATO's members.
Hmm.
The Russian regime was, like it wasn't like a real democracy. It was like a facade.
Yeah.
It was still very like actively military and showing its power. Invaded Chechnya, Georgia, and Ukraine, and finances pro-Russian rebels. So this is more than a justification for the NATO expansion or whatever. And also another like big contradiction that before the full-scale invasion, NATO, it was a zombie. Wasn't serious anymore, and it's why it's facing so many challenges nowadays, because they really got behind America or Russia or China, and is why have no like weapon production or munitions. The military industry is really bad on Europe, and even America having its issues and showing have like real serious problems. So NATO was like a zombie before the full scale invasion. It wasn't as powerful as people thought it was, and Russia knew that. And even Trump 2016 pointed this that NATO was very weak and they should spend more money on it because it wasn't sustainable. So yeah, it's a huge contradiction. This also because NATO have no plan to invade Russia. Russia had like almost 6,000 uh, nuclear weapons. Like no plan was established. This is so naive thinking that NATO would be issue for Russia. And also another contradiction that after full-scale invasion of Russia, Sweden and Finland, that were always neutral, become part of NATO. And actually, the front line share with NATO, with Russia, expanded even more. And this wasn't the issue for Russia,
Yeah, Putin
having
said.
like a new,
You see right here,
yeah,
Putin said it's not a problem.
so, you know, and
So
the evidence is so there.
if
And
it's
people
not
really,
if it's not a problem for Finland to join NATO, how is it a problem for Ukraine to join NATO? So
yeah, of course.
ultimately, we understand why he's treating Ukraine differently than all these other countries, and it purely comes down to his belief that they're not a real country and they always belong to Russia. It's just pure colonialism.
Yeah,
He understands that like Russian language is more spoken in Ukraine than it is in Finland, and so he's got a stronger grip over Ukraine than he does of Finland. And so it'll be much easier for him to influence Ukraine than it will be for him to control Finland. And so, and he's got Russian ethnics in Ukraine that he could also use politically, and he finances their parties and he can control them. So it's just expansion. It's colonialism. He sees Ukraine as a colony of Russia, and we just use the language arguments tactically to justify what he wants to do. So
yeah,
that
yeah.
and he's punishing them for the 2014. That's what it is. It's punishment, right? It's punishment for moving away from the Russian sphere.
Yeah, it's like, I think the inner cycle of Russia have like really this chauvinistic mentality,
Mm.
and this like old school imperial, modus operandi. Um, yeah, I couldn't agree with that, but I defend in my book as well that Ukraine is very strategical, not because Russia have to have like invade Ukraine because then it goes to the Carpats mountains and then like have like a natural barrier against Europe. Not about this, especially nowadays, knowing that having actually flat terrain is a very good natural resource against invaders because of drones nowadays. So having like flat terrain is perfect. So you can do surveillance and operate attacks against your enemies with drones. So having like actually like Ukraine, like the plains of the steppes of Ukraine and Russia are perfect for that. So this argument is not also is debunked, but I think the main reason is because of Ukrainian natural resources. So back in 2012, they found huge, you know,
Mm.
uh, oil and gas reserves on the eastern part of Ukraine and the Black Sea, and this really played a threat to Russia because they could see clearly that Ukraine was moving out of their influence and zone of sphere, and they want, and they thought potentially, okay, this country can now sell, oil and gas to, Germany and European countries and Turkey and Central Europe. So yeah, like maybe it's not a good idea for this because our economy, a big part of our economy depends on this sector, and why not invading them? Yeah, I think one of the main reasons actually was the natural resources of Ukraine. The good
Mm.
soil that they have, and Crimea because of their position and the port area, and also nowadays with the rare earths as well.
Yeah,
Ukraine
they
also of them.
they
Yeah.
actually said that on Russian TV. They said there's trillions of dollars of resources that can become ours if we annex their territory. And so it's just old school colonialism, right? It's resource extraction, it's language imperialism, it's cultural
Mhm.
imperialism. It's they just want to wipe Ukraine off the face of the earth because it's just a thorn in their side as a rebellious little brother type of situation, right?
Right.
You won't stay with us. You don't like us because of history. We beat you up. We beat the shit out of you historically. We banned
But
your
also, this is
language.
like a survival. You have to think like this. It's a survival thing. Think like this. If Ukraine strives and is very successful, like Poland is. Poland have no natural resources, but Ukraine have is And if Ukraine goes to European Union, no, probably less corruption. Society will function better. They will have a real state and things. And if they have a very successful country next to them, the Russian people will compare, Ukraine with Russia. And if the Ukrainians are healthy and rich and like having like a bright future, they will start to look at their own regime and see, okay, it's not so good. We are not so developed. The streets are not so clean. Some parts of our country they look like a terrible country. We want answers, and they start to 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 put the Putin or the Russian regime in check. And this is also very important for Russia not to have like a successful or a good example of a country, especially
So,
Ukraine.
last question.
Yes.
So, there's been some corruption scandals in Ukraine. Zelensky's second in command was implicated. This seems to be a very embarrassing aspect to Ukraine because it pretty much feeds into the kind of Zigger talking points, right? It's they're a corrupt country. We give them they're basically just washing American taxpayer money into their corruption schemes. So why should we give them money? Why should we give them weapons? They're just stealing the shit. And there was a pretty big corruption scandal that came out with Zelensky's right hand man. He was
Yeah,
fired, I
Mark.
believe. Um, so
Yes,
isn't
Mark.
isn't that an? I mean that looks terrible. I mean, for Zelensky to kind of go around the world asking for support, but then his top guys are being caught up in a sting. Like it looks pretty bad, and they're doing a pretty bad job of like rooting out the corruption.
Yes, yes. I wrote this chapter more than 1 year ago about the two problems of Ukraine, which is Russification and corruption. And I wrote this before these scandals. So
Mm.
I lived in Ukraine, so I'm very aware what's the problems there. Um, yeah, it's such a shame. Actually, I think it's one of the reasons that Ukraine have less and less volunteers and people that want to join the Ukraine armed forces
Mm.
because people are being demoralized with these corruption schemes and they are
Yeah.
tired of it. Especially young generations, they are really, really tired of this, and this corruption is really endemic there. It's a I like the pro-Ukrainians, they really think that Ukraine is going to win. Ukraine is the best, and it's not like that. Like Ukraine had the chance to win the war 3 years ago, but this corruption, this Soviet mentality was still like in the armed forces and the political sphere. And I think they lost a chance, to be very honest, Martinez, because of this. I think also Russia is not gonna like conquer the Ukraine because
Mm.
now withdrawal is possible. But I don't think Ukraine, gonna be in a very good
So
position.
So what's the solution? Do you think they're going to have to give up parts of the east? It seems like Russia's got a pretty dead grip on those eastern territories, especially Crimea, Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk. I mean, at the end of the day, there's going to be the support's not going to be unlimited, and if they keep having these corruption scandals, there's going to be even less impetus and desire to keep funding them. And it's become like an almost an election issue in Germany and the U.S. and so on. So, do you think they're going to have to just cut a deal there and give up some territory instead of just fighting indefinitely?
I think both countries now are under very big pressure, military speaking.
Mm.
Um, Maybe Russia is in a better position, but they have a lot of pressure as well. They also don't have like infinite resources, and these resources are really like fading away. Is why they cannot gain much terrain nowadays. Yeah, this is a very good question. I have no clear. Like, I don't even think I should have opinion about this because it's really impossible to know. Like someone was asking this in my book presentation when I did in Lisbon, and they were saying, okay, if Ukraine wins the war and recovers all these, Lugansk, Donetsk,
Mm.
Kherson, Crimea, what it's going to be like pro-Russian people living there and so on. This is going to be like a generational problem. It's mostly old people that are pro-Russia, but in 2 generations they won't have this problem. So it's going to be all about a question of time and patience. And to be more objective about answering your question, I mean, I think at this point, it's like only if Putin dies, for example, which is possible because he's old already, and it's
Mm.
some kind of crisis uh, among Russian elites. Maybe Ukraine have a chance to regain the territory. I think nowadays that's the only scenario. Is like to keep the pressure on Russia economy and military,
Yeah.
and hope that you know someone important that dies naturally at this point. And you have some logic in this
Mm.
because uh, their elites are old and so on. So yeah, the real like the 1 billion question is like, does Ukraine have enough resources to keep this now going on? This is the thing. Let's see.
All right, cool, man. So I posted the link to the book in the chat room if you guys want to check that out. It's called Ukrainian Identitarian Perspective by Luís Graça. How do I pronounce the name? Graça or That's
Graça.
Graça. Okay, perfect. Anything else you want to plug? I guess you're going to that remigration summit in Portugal.
Yes, we're gonna have like a stand there, so we're gonna publish our books, including mine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. It's always good to have like this networking and meeting other European and American comrades.
Yeah,
It's you know, it's always like
it's
you have good energy afterwards. I like it.
That was funny when I went to the Italy one. These people were like, I would go to the bathroom and like these people do like immediately recognize me, like people from Portugal, man, like these Portuguese guys. I was like, what? It's
Yeah,
crazy.
you have like some yeah. Like before actually we met, we were like watching your stuff,
Right.
because I think you bring like very good points. You just this nationalist chauvinistic guy. Like they want to be these guys that want to be socialists or communists. They really hate money and
Yeah.
uh, this vibe. So
National Bolshevism.
yeah, they have no idea how economy works, and they see like the demon. When they talk about the markets or something, they have no notion about this stuff. They are really
Well, they're
no little
basically
about.
what I noticed about socialists is they're all generally poor, and so because they're poor, they resent that other people aren't poor, so they want to redistribute it. I mean, that's usually the case with a lot of these NatSoc people, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you know, there could be some valid critiques of just pure greed mindset, but I don't think that means we abolish private enterprise and private businesses. I mean, that's a ridiculous solution. So, but there's two trends that I
Yeah,
called out was the Nazbol shit and then the Dugan shit. I mean, they pretty much are the same issue actually, because Dugan's a Nazbol. So it starts with the it's like yeah, they're Nazbol on the economic stuff, but then Nazbol turns into third worldism. It turns into Russophilia. It turns into the Eurasianism. It's pretty much all feeding into the same shit, right?
yeah, yeah. It's all part of same orbit.
We hate the
Um,
West. The West is decadent and evil, so let's join Russia. Yeah.
yeah, fight the global homo.
But this
Yeah,
guy
this.
here, this is him right here. This is Dugan.
Yeah, I have a sub chapter in my book that I called Dugin versus Dugin. Is based on his book Putin against Putin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I debunk his this traditional point of view.
Did you
It's a
did
really good book
did
called
you
by
did you see his
uh,
latest proclamation? He's like going after white people. I don't know if you saw that. Du-
I want.
Dugan was like, "White people are a failure" or some shit. Like he's gone full on anti-white.
Yeah, you have this really good book by this traditionalist guy um, called Charles Upton, and he wrote a book Dugin against Dugin, and my chapter is called Dugin versus Dugin. So he's like obviously inspired by him, and he really debunks like Dugin traditionalism and how fake it is. Yeah, I think it's worth it reading this because Dugin masks himself, being like this Canonian, Evulian, traditional guy. But it's all like a mirage. It's a facade. It's not real. Um, such like his ideas are so lazy sometimes. Like I like his critic towards liberalism. I think it's good. I I don't put these like I cannot deny this. It's not like otherwise no complex. Affirming this. But yeah, the rest is just like sometimes you really like
But he does he even
like
define what liberalism is? Because there's social liberalism, then there's economic liberalism, which is not the same
yeah,
thing, and then
yes, yes.
is he just talking about like democracy and human rights? Like it seems a bit confusing. That term it doesn't have a clear definition, right?
Yeah, like my friend also we also know this guy Flip, and also we because he's very like liberal economically, and he doesn't like this appropriation of this term.
Yeah,
But when he talks about liberalism, about talks about the egalitarian, democratic, universalistic,
right.
and also the markets as well. He talks. When you talk about liberalism, you talk about about these subjects. I will guess.
It's so mostly social, and people use the term. I mean, in the economic sense, socialism is the egalitarian one because they're advocating for income equality and redistribution, whereas capitalism is a hierarchical system where the strong survive, and if you're smart and high IQ, you can beat people who are low IQ, and so these like it's funny that the Nat Sox jump on that shit. On the one hand, they want to be these crazed like hierarchical racial Nordicists who want to like even create categories of whites. They put some on
Yes.
top, but then on the other hand, they're like full on egalitarians economically who say everybody's equal and we need socialism and redistribution and welfare and the street sweeper is just as valuable as the rocket scientist. So it's like egalitarianism on one hand and then full on like schizo hierarchy on the other, right? It's a
Yeah,
contradiction.
yeah. It's like a huge, huge contradiction. This, like, but they don't like stop to think about this. Like in 1 second, I like to use this term liberalism because it's very holistic, and when I say
Yeah.
it, people kind of understand what I mean. What I'm saying.
We're talking about
So
this, exactly this stuff here, right? Race stuff, gender stuff,
mhm.
feminism. This is the kind of this is what liberalism is known as today.
Yeah. And I think at some point it was more or less also related with this. But he comes from the real liberal revolutions in France and so on. When they want
Mm,
to have equality and liberty and fraternity. So
right.
yeah, I understand. I totally understand also this perspective. Like, and at some point also makes a bit of sense. Like Rousseau want to have a equal society, for example, and you know,
With
you could
that,
say that.
that turned out to be not the case, though. So,
Yeah.
all right, man. I
You know.
appreciate it. Yeah, we'll keep in touch and let
Yeah,
me
thank you
know.
so much for like to be here. Like actually, I listened so many times to your podcast and to your videos. So like actually it's my second time here, but it was really thank you. Like I really appreciate it. I really like the gesture.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks, and we'll keep in touch. See
Thank
you.
you.
See you soon, man. Take care.
Yeah. See you. Bye.
All right, we're gonna take a short break, and then I'm gonna do some Omi TV. We'll be right back.